Hello, and welcome to another episode of Power Hour, hosted by Women in Energy Pakistan, which is a professional network of more than 5,000 female professionals in the energy sector in Pakistan. It's a network that fosters a culture of career development for more female leaders. My name is Sarah Kazmi, partner at Energy Resource Management in Islamabad. And for the next half an hour, I'm being joined by two fellow lawyers, Sarah Malik and Bisma Khan, to talk about skills for energy lawyers. So, Sarah, let's begin. How about you first tell us a little bit about your background in energy and then tell us the scope of the energy sector? In other words, when we say energy lawyers, who all are we talking to?
So thanks, Sarah, and good to be on the Power Hour series here at the Women in Energy platform. It's a powerful platform to be a part of. So thanks to them for having us today. Let's take your question bit by bit, right? So first on the bio, I've got about 11 years of experience in the industry. Started my career after an LLM in energy law and policy from the University of Dundee. Started working in-house with a private oil and gas firm and then with a multinational firm. Transitioned on to becoming an advisor with USAID and then with the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Resources, now known as the Ministry of Energy. But throughout my career, I found that the one thing that helped me was the aspect of fungibility, because this is a talk on skills, right? So I think what I'm trying to say is that energy lawyers now today working especially need to realize that at one moment in time, you're wearing a hat where you're advising your client on oil and gas contracts. But in the next instance, what you're doing is you're trying to build strategies to mitigate business risk. And I mentioned this, Sarah and Bisma, because you both will, as you will be highlighting, is there's so much of interplay of so many sectors here, right? That you have to be able to be flexible. And that is what energy is. So before I go into your question of energy law and what energy lawyers do, energy is something that we rely on deeply. So from using the Ziploc bag, which is a petrochem product, to fueling your car or charging your car if you have an electric vehicle, to I think flicking on the switch to have electricity. The reliance is deep, and that is where energy law comes in, because energy law, what it does, it puts in place laws, a compliance system, rules, policies in place so that this energy system works efficiently. And that is what energy law for me is. It's working of an efficient energy system. And that's where energy lawyers come in, because energy lawyers, what they do is you're either working with international organizations, for example, the United Nations Convention of Climate, you're working with ministries, you'll be it DGPC, NEPRA, OGRA, and then you're working with power companies, you're working with independent law firms, you're working with oil and gas companies or national oil companies. Or you're doing, you're doing power generation, transmission, distribution, generation. It could be clubbed under three sectors. You could be doing transactional work, you could be doing regulatory work, or you could be doing, dispute resolution. But all in all, what energy lawyers are doing, that they're using their knowledge and then leveraging their skills for the working of an efficient energy system. So be it critical thinking, problem solving, interpersonal skills. Now, Sarah, you're in the both of you are in the sector. I put the question back to you. What skills do you think are important for energy lawyers to have?
Right. So, just to give a bit of background first. So, I've been practicing as a lawyer in Islamabad for about 13 years. And my 10 years of energy experience has primarily been in the E&P sector, that's upstream oil and gas, and the power sector. Just recently in 2020, I've been introduced to the tech energy startup space. It's a new area that I'm interested in. And it got me thinking about how I can focus on, legal skills that are specific to the startup technology companies in the energy sector. But primarily keeping my, experience in mind, which is E&P and power. The legal skill that I wanted to highlight is of drafting, but in connection to resolving disputes through negotiations. And what I mean by that is that when you're involved in dispute resolution negotiations, the skill of drafting of a claim, or if you're from the other side, defense can be very important. So if I take the E&P sector, for example, where you have E&P companies and you have service sector companies, whenever there's a dispute, many of these companies engage lawyers to resolve, but without actually going to court. And this is not because they think that the legal system is slow or it's going to cost too much money. It's purely for commercial reasons. I've had E&P companies say that we need to keep the regulator happy. So every time there's an issue, we can't be going to the high court filing a 199 petition, and same thing goes for like their JV partners. It's meant to be like a decades long relationship. So they have issues, but it's court is always as a last resort. Same thing goes for companies that are providing services. This is something that I've been told by so many, that the E&P sector is really small. So we don't want to have that reputation of going around suing people and taking them to court. And even if we manage to get a favorable decision, or for that claim, what about future contracts, right? And I've had two Chinese companies say that our instructions from our head office in China were solve this matter, but don't go to court. And when I asked them what's the reason, they literally said Pakistan China friendship. And I didn't realize that there are so many other reasons other than legal and commercial. And, this is
Yeah.
something we're taught in bar school in our negotiation class, that you don't tell your client that, oh, but if I was in your position, I wouldn't do this, or I wouldn't settle, or I wouldn't give these. You're not in their position. You're meant to act on their instructions. You can try and persuade them and give them a little perspective. But at the end, so for them, if going to court is not an option and they say, look, you need to negotiate just within this time frame without going to court, do the best that you can. So for me, I would say that just because you're not going into litigation, you can still use a lot of those litigation skills when you're trying to, let's say, negotiate and get the best deal out of a claim. So drafting a claim and the particulars of a claim, I think, is a very important skill. One tip that I would give to those lawyers that are listening is, I've actually taken something from the US civil procedure. So over there, in what they do is that whenever you file something in court, you attach a document called a memorandum of points and authorities. And it's a very detailed document. It sets out your entire case, your law, case law, legal reasoning, evidence, because over there they tend to rely less on oral hearings. Now in Pakistan, we don't have that in our courts. We tend, courts have hearings, and then they listen to your arguments and then they decide. But when you're negotiating a matter outside the court, you can adopt any persuasive drafting technique, that would work for you. So persuasive drafting skills when it comes to claims, I think, is important. Just to give a quick example from the other side. So I was once engaged by a client. They were, again, a service company in the power sector. They used to have the opposite problem. So they would have people send them frivolous claims, but because the management was like, I would just rather settle and pay than actually take the risk of even dealing with it, or the risk of them taking them to court, just for their peace of mind. So when I came on board, those were my instructions. And Sarah, now this is becoming a nuisance because every second month we have somebody sending us this claim. So do something. And when I looked at their history, I was like, why would you even pay them a penny? There's no need to settle. So when I would receive a flimsy 3-pager notice of claim, I would act like this is a matter that's going to be before the court and they're going to hear it, even though they're obviously not. So I would respond with like a very aggressive manner, but through drafting. So I would respond with a 10-pager that would set out like a very detailed legal reasoning and case law and why you have no case. And if you don't withdraw, we're actually going to take you to court. And, so when that would work, the client used to be so happy, not because I saved the company money, but for peace of mind. So
You did
I
save the
think,
money.
again, drafting And I wasn't working in-house. I was an external lawyer, but
Yeah.
even if I was, I think that skill would come in handy. So for those that say we're not litigation lawyers, we work in-house or we're in an advisory capacity, you're bound to run into disputes in the energy sector. So I think having that skill set, comes in handy. So apart from dispute resolution, another aspect of the legal practice is transactional work. So Bisma, I want to talk to you about this and about your experience as an energy transactional lawyer. Can you first give your brief background, about yourself and then how you were introduced to the energy legal practice?
Okay, hello everybody. So I completed my law degree in 2016, after which I went to Hong Kong to start my law career there. I returned to Islamabad in 2018 and joined a leading law firm in the energy sector in Pakistan shortly after. My experience as an associate engaged in renewable energy transaction was very educational for me as a person and as a member of the legal fraternity. I was involved with around 5 wind power projects that were part of the 2019 renewable energy projects that were given a green light by the regulatory authorities after almost 2 years of delay in approval due to government policies in Pakistan. In renewable energy, there are quite a few components at play from the start of the project to the point where financial close is reached, such as whether it is on the agenda of the regulatory authority and the government combined, which then paves the way for financiers to consider whether a deal in this climate would be ideal and how to build in safeguards to ensure that their financial investments are protected, and while also foreseeing how the project proceeds in relation to first obtaining a generation license.
Okay, so can you also tell us a little bit about your role within the team? I mean, I know you were working as an associate in the firm, but what was your role? And then if you can maybe just point out two or three like major legal steps that are involved in the transaction.
So my role in the team was a holistic one. The thing about energy projects of this nature is that everything is interlinked. So for me to be involved in the manner that I was basically involved in all aspects of the project, be it the financial agreements, the company law matters, the EPC contracts, the EPA contract, etc. This included conducting extensive due diligence into the project company, working on legal opinions on various aspects of the project, such as in relation to a certain finance document and its enforceability due to it being interlinked to the agreements made with the government of Pakistan. Furthermore, since the project were so time constrained due to the sudden policy shift by the government, we essentially were required to complete the whole project in less than half the time it would take in normal circumstances, which meant that you have to be in constant collaboration with foreign financier, local financiers, the project company, the financier's legal counsel, the government legal counsel, and every other stakeholders involved. So, for renewable energy, especially wind power, which I was mainly involved in, the most critical aspect, as is with all power projects, is to ensure that once the initial regulatory authorities and the government approvals and financing is in place, that the power plant generates the electricity anticipated in energy purchase agreement, even with the mechanism built in for delays when, for instance, the wind power is low due to the weather conditions. So for wind power projects in Pakistan, the equipment which fulfills the criteria is not available in the country or is not manufactured in the country. For that, we basically execute a offshore supply contract, which essentially covers the materials required for the construction of the wind turbine and the feasibility of running of the whole operation. Considering how crucial this agreement is to the project, the guarantee for the delivery of the equipment are built in through performance bonds, liquidated damages. The most crucial agreement in relation to the construction aspect of the project is, of course, the EPC contract. My role in these major contracts included drafting, negotiating, and risk analysis. These were foreign companies that we were negotiating with and dealing with. So the aspect was interesting to me and showed me how different their negotiation style is. The main clauses that were challenging to reach a consensus on were the damages clauses. The two major damages clauses in such agreements are the delay liquidated damages and the performance liquidated damages, because the timeline and the quality of work can make or break the project. In my case, the partner I was working with had provided me with a template, which is ideal to use in these sort of situations because there are only a few companies that actually provide these equipments and this kind of work to Pakistan, and they to use a previously executed contract as a draft makes it an easier process as opposed to drafting a whole new agreement altogether. So then what happens is that this agreement is worked on and clauses are reviewed again, and then they're strengthened in our favor, taking into account the requirements of the current climate, etc. These are then shared with the contractors, after which the negotiations begin. It could take just a few calls to close some points, but with others, it would take weeks due to the risks involved on each side.
So, what about, okay, you mentioned EPC contracts. Can you just like very briefly mention any other contracts that were involved? And again, focus on, what your role was in, again, the execution of these contracts.
So the other types of contracts in this sort of a project would be like one would be like a project coordination deed, which essentially is for the project company to sign a deed with the contractors. So there are different contractors: the EPC contractors, the offshore supply contractors, and the wind power operation and management contractors, to coordinate timelines and liabilities. Other than the construction related agreement, the energy purchase agreement and the implementation agreement are the main agreements involving the government of Pakistan, which are signed through the Central Power Purchasing Agency and the Alternative Energy Development Board, respectively. These agreements essentially seek to guarantee the implementation of the project and the purchase of the generated electricity and the payment for the electricity that is bought from the project company. My role in these contracts was risk mitigation, negotiation, drafting, and the finalization of the agreements. A lot of financial agreements are also involved in the transaction, which are different in relation to each project. I have worked on both Islamic financing and conventional financing for the wind projects. These financial agreements also tie in the government in the EPA direct contract and IA direct contract, which allows for the financier to step in case of a default on the part of the project company. Similar direct agreements are also signed with the contractors, where the financier is a security trustee for any default, essentially giving them step in rights in the agreements.
So, I mean, you mentioned, quite a few elements. What would you say was the most difficult part of the project for you? If you had to pick one, where did you think you struggled, or what was difficult about it?
So for me personally, the most difficult one would be, I guess, the finance agreements and the sheer volume and the complexity of them. These agreements are interlinked with every single aspect of the project, be it government-related agreements, construction agreement, generation licenses, financial close, the power purchase guarantee, etc. The thing about the financial agreement is that due to the sum of the financing required for such a huge project, a lot of checks are in place to ensure that nothing is missed out or overlooked. Hence, the conditions precedent built in the financial agreements prior to the first disbursement requires a lot of time and effort to review each and every document and provide legal opinions on them, gathering information from the project company, then creating a database which is accessible to foreign lenders and local lenders, which requires constant coordination and structuring throughout. Like this, it's not only till the financial close; like it goes way beyond that until the construction actually begins, and even after that.
And you mentioned earlier that you were also involved in negotiation. So, were there any difficulties that you faced while you had to negotiate? And if you can, again, briefly touch upon that.
So just to give you a background, so at the time when I was working on these projects, there was a commercial code which was issued by the regulator, which was basically prevailing at the time. That basically had the provision that CPPA, which is a Central Power Purchasing Agency, which is supposed to purchase the electricity from the generated electricity from the power project company, will not be held liable for non-payment to the project company and will only act as an agent of a distribution company. So basically, what happens is there are three parties at play. One is the project company, one is the government, and one is the distribution company, which distributes electricity, sells it off, gives the money to the government, which then comes to us. So considering that the terms of the commercial code prevails over the terms of EPO or any contract signed, therefore CPPA, while being the primary guarantor under the EPA in relation to the energy payment and other payments in relation to supply of energy, they would only be liable to such payment if the distribution company makes payment to them. So the issue here was that the EPA is a bilateral agreement between the CPPAG and the project companies, and this is not a trilateral agreement where the distribution company would also be a party. So this would mean that me as a project company would have no contractual nexus with the distribution company, and therefore in case of non-payment by the distribution company and then CPPA not being able to pay us, the project company has no direct or independent right against the distribution company to ensure payments of due under the EPA. So this essentially meant that the project financiers would expect a delay on payment obligation to them, which changed the nature of the whole deal. This created a rather tense negotiating environment where we had to guarantee where we're there to guarantee payment, but there's a clear piece of law that says otherwise. So this was one of the other issue that we faced when while negotiating.
Well, in negotiating and keeping myself to the ambit of transactional negotiation, I think the skill that is required here is that, or what I would like energy lawyers especially to enhance, and as you've mentioned, it's dispute resolution, and it's, as you've mentioned, Bisma, it's a lot of, again, interplay of systems, is going into that room of negotiation. And when going in for negotiation, don't think of it as a competition, right? You think of it as co-creation, because you're coming out with having a strategy that brings value and commercial success to both parties. So as an example, when I was working in-house, we had this asset which was non-commercial due to policy pricing. And a policy had though been introduced, it was not guaranteed to all oil and gas players. Now, as a person who would have checklist, was on the checklist of the policy, applied to us 100%, we could have gone into the regulator guns blazing, "Ye hame dein, I'm going to be bilingual here," and say, "Ki hamara hak hai, aap hame ye policy ki price dein." But you see, negotiating with and stakeholders, so sabse pehle aapne apna stakeholder manage karna hai aur aapne negotiate bhi karna hai, right? So these are the two things you have to balance. So instead of just going in guns blazing, what we did, and I think that, and it did work, right? You went to the regulator and you say, "Hey, you know what, even though we are 100% on board and we want this policy price, what would work is if this policy price is given, not only will the supply and demand gap decrease for Pakistan because we'll be producing more because this is going to be commercial for us, but also there's going to be domestic production." So that kind of like got the regulator on board. So I think there has to be strategies that lawyers think of that engages the other party and makes there be a solution that is mutually beneficial and creates value for both parties. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean, this is just as I hear both of you talk about negotiation, just my take on it is that I think it's a skill that you can really improve on with experience, but only if
Absolutely.
you are able to kind of self-reflect and assess your performance essentially, like what worked and what didn't work. And I'm just like, just to kind of give my own example. So one thing that I always struggled with, again, this is something that a tutor of mine in bar school told me, but in a conference skill class, that Sarah, you're too blunt, and it was a sort of a role play exercise where, I'm talking to my client. And he, at the end of the feedback, he tells me he repeated every sentence that I said and how I could have said it differently. And he's like, "Sarah, I gotta tell you, you're too blunt here."
And it's
And
key, right? Having feedback is key.
he was absolutely right, because a few years ago, I remember I was involved in what I would call transactional negotiations, and it was over a span of 6 months. And they were on various issues. And, so because my sort of temperament and natural style is straightforward, on the blunt side, and especially if I feel like my client has no reason to discuss and entertain the other side, it's more like, let's not waste time, and this is it, get the other side to agree and move on. But what that would do was it would create such a tense and awkward environment, and I was the sole cause of it. And so after like the
Astutely.
first two times, I was like, you know what, these are bad negotiations on my part. The client doesn't care, because I feel like as long as they get what they want, it doesn't matter to them. So since then, I decided to be very conscious of my tone and just the words that I use, and like not start with a "no" and "this is what I want," because that's just too like, you don't need to be aggressive, especially in transactional sort of negotiations where you're going to talk to them again 2 weeks later, and you
Yeah.
don't want the tension from the previous meeting to spill into it. So that would be my take on negotiations. But Sarah, I wanted to also like quickly ask you about the skill of legal research, because again, a lot of like young legal practitioners, they come into the profession and they're introduced to the skill of legal research, but in the context of writing a legal opinion. So they're researching case laws and those kinds of authorities. So can you highlight another aspect of legal research that you think is relevant for the energy sector?
So let me mix that, right? Let me mix that legal research with a skill. And the one thing that I would highlight here is the networking skill that you require for that research. And when I say this is, for example, again, when I was working in-house, I was given this work for working on a tripartite gas processing agreement. Now, I hadn't heard of it. It hadn't happened in the industry. I didn't have precedent to go by, so I couldn't cut, copy, paste a document. So there were two things I relied on. Within the company, I relied on the network. I had to go sit with the exploration people, the facilities people, my finance team. पहले क्योंकि understand करना था कि होगा क्या, right? अगर meters 10 feet के फासले पे लगेगा या it's going to be there in 5 feet, how the pressure is going to change, how the cost is going to change. So first, I would say on this basis, I would say sit with your peers and understand what's going on. The second is because there was no industry example, I relied on my network, which is the University of Dundee ka alumni network. I wrote on the forum and I said, yaar, agar kisi ne kiya hai, काम भेज सकता hai. To my amazement, Mozambique had done it. I got a template. I worked on that template, but I gelled it to the current circumstance. So the network skill here, along with the research, of course, there are legal opinions and there are precedents in it. But you need to understand that there's a lot more best practice research out there. All you need to do is go and connect with people. And on that point, I would like to reiterate on the networking part, connect with people. There's so many industry players out there. I believe Women in Energy has a mentoring program. We at Energy Resource Management have a networking, a mentorship program. So be a part of these networks. And as you put 100%, get feedback from colleagues. And if you don't get along with your colleagues, get feedback from your friends. And it's good to always better yourself.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the thing that because a lot of young lawyers, they're sometimes trained by very senior lawyers, and times have changed. Networking has completely changed. So I think
Yes.
that's a very good tip when it comes to legal research. Kind of
So
think
I
outside
think
the
we're
box.
getting on time, and before we
Okay.
end this, Bisma and Sarah, I would like to have concluding audience just to wrap things. Concluding comments, not audience. Concluding comments from you to tell the audience. Bisma, I'll start with you.
Some closing remarks from my side would be for those who are looking to work in this sector, the renewable energy sector, especially. The most important skills that are required are drafting, negotiating, research, and communication as well. So these are the essential skills that you can't do without when you're working here, and you have to expect that there's going to be like a lot of different sort of agreement. It's going to be like finance, non-finance sort of agreement. So this is like my suggestion for anybody who's looking to come into this sector. And as a closing remark, I would like to thank Women in Energy for hosting this and kind of highlighting the importance of lawyers in energy in Pakistan.
Sarah?
Yeah, so I mainly want to talk to those lawyers that want to get into or they want to set up their own practice and they're looking to cater to clients in the energy sector. I do get a lot of young lawyers that ask me, like, okay, how do we get into it? What do clients need? So, one sort of tip is that you need to do a lot of focused research on the type of companies and what their sort of business is and what their commercial activity is, and then kind of highlight your like very specific skills. So, for example, if you are trying to approach a company in the service sector, like for example, like Bisma was talking about EPC contracts, right? So if they're service contracts, somebody has to draft them, right? That's where you come in. And if you're a UK qualified lawyer practicing in Pakistan, maybe highlighting contracts governed under English law and Pakistani law, that might seem a bit more attractive to the client. Again, if there are contracts, there's going to be a dispute at some point, a claim or, of some sort. So again, highlighting the skill of maybe, drafting contract claims that might be helpful. And I also want to thank Women in Energy for highlighting the role of lawyers. And I hope we kind of have more sessions with lawyers from other cities. I'm happy that the three of us we got to represent Islamabad, so I'm very happy about that. But looking forward to more sessions in the future. Yeah.
And as we just conclude, three things from my side. One, learn more, as Bisma would have highlighted with the financial aspect of the contracts. There's no need. I mean, it's said that lawyers and finance does not go together. So learn more. You've got forums like LinkedIn Forum. You've got Coursera. You've got ambit of plethora of platforms which make you learn courses. I'm on a project management course with Coursera. I know there are a ton of other courses that are available. The second thing I would just recommend to the audience here is that whether working in-house or as an external advisor, always question yourself. Can you be more efficient in your work? Can you add more value? Can you be more responsible? And that's where the feedback really comes in, right? You're reflecting on how you're handling the project. And third, and especially talking to the young women here, never be afraid to take a seat at the table. Make your voice heard. If you lack confidence, I mean, as I explained, there are mentoring sessions out there. Women in Energy has one. We at ERM have one. Look at other forums. Connect yourself with an industry leader. And on that note, being 1 minute over, thank you everyone for joining us today. Women in Energy is a powerful platform to be a part of. Stay up to date on the latest news by subscribing to their YouTube channel, and details on how to become a member are in the description. So thank you both, and thank you for Women in Energy for having us today.